Welcome to Life of Die, the podcast which discusses all things role-playing game and wargaming related. Today I'm joined by two epic legends, Peter Ramos and David MacDonald, both of whom have collaborated together to create a new system for 6mm Warhammer 40,000 called Imperius Dominatus. Welcome to Life of Die, both.
Thanks, Gordon.
Hey, guys.
Thanks for coming on to talk about this. So I thought probably the best place to start would be to ask about your own histories with Epic and why you love it so much.
Well, I guess since David already said that I had to answer first, I will go first. Well, most know me as Primarch, also as the NetEpic coordinator. I've been around Epic for as long as Epic has been around, so that's about 32 years going on now. Starting with Adeptus Titanicus, released back in 1989. The way I got into Epic was perhaps the way most people get, through 40K, although back then it was Rogue Trader. I remember I went into a hobby store and I bought the Slaves of Darkness book, which a lot of old hands remember. It's still a highly sought after book from the old days that covers the 40K universe as well as some fantasy elements as well. And I started with Rogue Trader. I was very captured by the narrative of the universe. I always was kind of unhappy with it because my background is more in mass combat from before that, like historicals and micro armor. But at that point, the Games Workshop only had the skirmish game, so I started with that. But as soon as Adeptus Titanicus came out and then the first edition of Space Marine, I pretty much remember seeing the ads for that, not in a White Dwarf, but in Dragon Magazine, which, I actively role-play a lot back then. And no sooner had I read the ad, I was pretty much hooked. I mean, I like the universe. I like mass combat. So basically, sight unseen, without playing the game or anything, I promptly sold all my Rogue Trader stuff, included all those miniatures for skirmish game and whatnot, and invested in Epic. And as the rest, as they say, is history.
What about yourself, David?
For myself, we had a couple good friends in high school. We used to play all the time, and I actually owned all the armies, and they would just use my figures, but we would have 2 games a week. And then later on, we started playing with a campaign with several guys, and we would play on this ping pong table, and we would play 3 or 4 times a week. We were pretty crazy. Like, his wife got tired of us coming on over all the time. And I remember when they canceled Games Workshop, they canceled Epic, and my friend owned a distribution company that wholesale Games Workshop products. He said, "Dave, we're closing off this line. Do you want to get anything at bargain prices? We're clearing them out for $1.50 a blister."
Nice.
So I went in there and I bought everything they had, which was 800 blisters, and I split it with my buddies. And all the boxes of infantry were like $5 or something. Just basically cleaned the guy out of his Epic. So he was happy. He got rid of his stock. He wasn't carrying anymore. And we hunted around for different stores. So we were buying Hellbores for $10 at the Silver Snail down in Toronto. And
Yes, I remember well the Great Purge of 1997 after the the 3rd edition got released, and it didn't do commercially well. So yeah, much like David, I picked up a lot of stuff at unbelievable prices.
Yeah, the only thing I regret was not buying them all, because they had like 5 Capital Imperialis for $10 each, and I didn't have enough cash, so I didn't buy the rest. But
ooh, that hurt.
And they were in those old plastic boxes that would kill you if you tried to open them wrong.
Right.
So, but now I think no one's really seen my whole collection, but I could give Peter a rival of his old collection for about 60% or 70% of what he had.
Wow.
But I have more armies than you do, though. I have Necrons and Tau and other forces that I didn't see you.
As they say, the king is dead, long live the king. I may not be the Primarch load holder anymore, but there are many contenders to the throne, and David MacDonald is one of them.
So we figured at 20,000 points to 30,000 points is the armies I try to build.
Man.
Not enough.
Oh, mine's are poor by comparison, but yeah, I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, maybe you want to say about how big your collection was, Peter?
I guess I should kind of fill in, because, everybody remembers that I coordinated NetEpic for 20 years, but I guess a lot more people just remember the Primarch load. And as most things of that nature, it just starts, you don't wake up one day and says, hey, yeah, I'm going to make the largest Epic collection in the world. No, it never starts that way. It's just that back then, used to run a little hobby shop, so obviously you get things at a retailer's discount. So you would stock the store with what you needed to stock with, and you keep some for yourself. And little by little, things start getting bigger and bigger. And I guess much like as David said, when the game went out of print around 1999, a lot of people would just give their stuff to me. I mean, not even sell it. He said, "Oh yeah, this nobody plays this anymore. So here, have this whole bunch of plastic miniatures and metal miniatures and whatnot." And of course, Games Workshop at one point in time even sold Gargants for $5 when they were getting rid of their stuff, much as what David explained. So things mushroomed a lot during that period. And before I knew it, when I started taking stock of what I had, I mean, it was really large. And of course, the Epic community is pretty tight knit, so people talk to each other. And I realized around that time that I had a little bit more than what most people had. And then it sort of became this self-sustaining myth after a while.
I think you just sort of went with it, right? You just sort of went with it for fun.
Yeah. And then at a certain point, fan-made stuff started appearing, so I started picking up that as well. But then it always comes to the point of like, why do you have all this? What are you going to do with it? And that became the realization for me. And to be very candid about it, I wasn't all that happy about how some of the stuff looked, because I don't tend to be a very nostalgic person as it goes. Yeah, I learned it when it was this era, so I like it that way. It don't change much. I tend to always like the new and up and coming things. So I kind of visualized this period as, it's a good idea to just get rid of all this stuff, and then I'll just collect the more recent stuff. So currently I'm kind of in with Adeptus Titanicus models. So those are really pretty. I always wanted something that was at scale and kind of concentrating more on 30K. So that's kind of the reason for letting go of the Primarch load now. And to be, again, very candid, I mean, why keep stuff in my house when so many gamers out there really need stuff to complete their collections and they're actually going to use it? So, it was kind of a component that as I grew older, I got less like a dragon hoarding everything needlessly. And I said,
Yeah.
So I just let it all go.
You see, I played Epic a long time ago, and then I sort of dropped it, not did anything with it. I kept all the models for about, 15 years, and I played Napoleonics and 6 Mil and Club in Toronto, and I helped design rules with them, which are published by Bacchus now, and Franklin Pierce.
Yeah, that is a good company for 6mm stuff.
Yeah, so that's what I did. I've been in that Napoleonics Club for 30 years, and so I've been back and forth, historical, science fiction, and when I met Peter, I started looking at all the new formware, and which is all banned now and hard to get. But all the modern stuff that Games Workshop that has produced for the last 25 years for 40K and 30K, which all the new models are in Epic, and it'd be like we never had any rules for them, so decided to fix that. That's how we got into the Imperius Dominatus.
Yeah.
I guess we're getting into the next question now there, Gordon.
Yeah, we are. Before we do, I do want to say thanks, Peter, for having that hoard, because when I was growing my collection and it was getting bigger and bigger, when you posted that up on Tactical Command, when I showed it to my wife and I said, "Look, I'm not that bad. Look at this."
Yeah. I have been thanked by many people, just such as yourself, for the same reason. They said, "Look, honey, my addiction ain't so bad. Look at this guy."
So that was very helpful for my marriage. Thanks for that.
Yes, no doubt. Unfortunately, you can't use that as an excuse anymore.
The only thing is, did it work?
It did work. It worked perfectly.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I know I don't have everything in Epic, and I think it's pretty hard to have everything in it, but I've got most of the stuff that I want now. So I know some people will be horrified. You never finish your Epic collection, but I do feel like I've got most of the things I want.
It's really hard to do that. There are some things only available on mail order for a short time, and those are really hard to get.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the things that Games Workshop did releasing the game, and especially in the waning years, was suboptimal. I mean, like, for example, a lot of the more rare stuff like Titan kits and whatnot were available through Games Workshop, but they weren't widely publicized, and the window was relatively narrow, no more than a couple of months or maybe a year at most. So if you kind of missed that out, which was very easy to do, you basically missed out. But it's kind of unfortunate. But at least with the sale of the Primarch load, I know a lot of people filled out the odds and ends the way they wanted to, and there's a certain satisfaction in that. At least it served the purpose, because I know people will play with their things far more than what I did.
Yeah, that's a great thing. But anyway, as you mentioned, Imperius Dominatus is what we're here to talk about, and it's a rule set that you've designed a new system for Epic Warhammer 40,000. So I suppose, how did you come to work together? Because I know these are separated by at least a time zone, and I believe you're in different countries, is that right?
Yes, David's in Canada and I'm in Oklahoma in the U.S. We're separated by about an hour in the time zones. Well, again, nobody wakes up one day and says, "Hey, let's make a new Epic system, brand new, with no new rules and new mechanics and everything." If you've been around me for a long time, especially in the years of coordinating NetEpic, you always knew that I had a certain dissatisfaction with the rules as they are. In fact, the NetEpic Gold was pretty much the culmination of that rule set, and the covenant between me and the gaming community was that we would finally make a stable version of those rules. And in case people didn't know, that was the 5th revision of the NetEpic rules. So there was an evolution that took about a decade to the point where we made NetEpic Gold. And I understand, and I have to respect those who are not really interested in, just modifying the rules further than they are. They're comfortable where they're at. Their forces are constructed under the paradigm of NetEpic and whatnot. So I think it was important at the time to say, okay, this is the ultimate expression of these rules. We're not going to fool around with them anymore, because people like a certain baseline stability in their chosen rule set, and it will be basically made available in perpetuity through the website, which is netepic.org. And that's what we've done, and that's what we accomplished. And a lot of people like that.
People like that because they don't want to learn new rules all the time. That's why sometimes Games Workshop, with all the different editions, gets criticized each time put a new edition out. They don't want to change rules all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's human nature to sometimes resist change. And sometimes, let's be honest, not all change is good. And sometimes there's change for the sake of change. But now, one thing is, because I always keep separate what I believe is the good of the Epic community as a whole, and what Peter Ramos likes. And I always keep those two silos separate, because I think NetEpic is something larger than just myself. A lot of people put a lot of work into it, a lot of testing into it, and a lot of people like it. So I reached the point where I said, okay, this is what it is. And that's what people want and like. That's what people download up to this day. So if I want something, I need to do something on my own. And that's how Imperius Dominatus started. I didn't think I was going to do another project. I just said, okay, I'm interested in 30K now. There's a lot of new stuff, and I'm going to make a rule set. And it's not the first time I've done this. Those who've been around for a long time and visit the NetEpic website can see my old heresy rules, which I made back in the day when we were doing NetEpic. So that desire within me has always existed. The thing is, it became more active in recent years, and I said, okay, I'm going to do a rule set. And I think in passing on one of the Facebook groups, I just happened to mention it. That's where David latched on. And I was like, initially I was taken aback. I was like, this is just something I just came up with. Who cares? Well, apparently David cared.
I was posting on TACCOM and got a lot of resistance from people who didn't want anyone messing with NetEpic the way it was written. I was kind of bored of NetEpic at that time. No offense, Peter. It's just that...
Oh, no, none taken.
The units themselves and the cards weren't that interesting anymore with all the new stuff out. It's all, there's only so many combinations of orcs you could field, and I just wanted to upgrade and update everything with all the new stuff. And I have, 50 of the codexes and books for reference, and all the Forge World books and all the cool models in there. I wanted to be able to use them in Epic, and it wasn't happening with NetEpic because no one would agree on statistics for vehicles if you design them anyway. So I decided, let's try a new one. And Unlike NetEpic, when I was designing the rules with my friend for Napoleonics, we would change things weekly. If it didn't work, we would keep trying different things, and that was our main goal. Make sure keep playing testing all these different slight variations of the rules to see which one is the best. So I decided, well, I tried to put up information on TACCOMs, and then I started talking to Peter about it, and then we both decided, hey, well, Dave, you got good ideas. I say, Peter, you know how to do all this, like writing up the community and doing all that, and you have good ideas too. Let's combine our efforts and make a new system.
Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, that's a good example of how two people from differing backgrounds with a common interest and love and epic get together, do something. Because what he just described is what I went through. Now, as somebody who once occupied an official position within the NetEpic structure, you'll never hear me go and badmouth NetEpic. NetEpic is a great set of rules. It has withstood the test of time. It is literally the oldest and most downloaded version of Epic, and most played version of Epic of all the versions of Epic. That's just not me being hyperbolic. I mean, as I was discussing with Gordon before we started recording, I used to keep track of download statistics and all that. I mean, the NetEpic is downloaded to this day at a clip that's, very humbling. I mean, people like the rule set. But again, as I mentioned before, one thing is what the community likes, and I respect what they like, and I provided what they want. But another thing is what I happen to like at that moment. Much like David, I had grown, rather weary of the rule set over the year. It was kind of stale. I mean, I've played literally hundreds of games of NetEpic, so it was time for a change.
I didn't like Epic 40,000 and didn't like Epic Armageddon. I didn't like the way you could build units in Armageddon, and didn't like the generic firepower stuff. I wanted more specific, like more examples of translating a 40K model or a 30K model into Epic, have the effects.
Yeah.
And that's why I decided to do, like, Imperius Dominatus is quite detailed in terms of unit statistics.
Right. Well, so you can already see where me and David kind of came together, and what, without formalizing it, there was an underlying philosophy there, right? We both wanted an Epic rule set, a 6mm rule set that would represent the 40K and 30K universe, but as it is, not as it was. Say what you will, how great the Epic community is, we are getting a little bit dated. Epic's been around for 32 years, but Epic has not been supported by Games Workshop for 16 years. That's a long time, and a lot has happened in 16 years. Not least of which is the Horus Heresy and 30K, which ironically is how Epic started back in the game with first edition, and then the second edition kind of morphed into a more 40K centric kind of game. So we both wanted the same thing.
I know Epic Armageddon's been played a lot by people, but for myself, my collection, I can't even put on a tenth of my models with one battle because it's so small.
Right.
So I said, that's not the game system I want to play. I want to be able to use lots of models. And Armageddon doesn't accommodate that. If it gets too big, it gets broken.
So basically, you have two people that saw eye to eye on very basic things. We wanted a modern representation of what the game is as of today. 2, we wanted a real mass combat game going back to its roots that would scale at any amount of points. So even if consciously I and David at the very beginning, when we were getting to know each other, didn't know it, me having a little bit of experience with, coordinating that, we knew we were laying a philosophical groundwork. And I guess we're leading into the next question, which is, What is Imperius Dominatus? And what defines it, and how is it different or similar to previous games? Now, one thing David and I were in agreement from the very beginning was that we were going to be very open-minded. We were not going to partialize ourselves with any one system. All systems had very good subsystems within them, and in some cases very imaginative and very fun. So we sat down and kind of said, okay, what everybody liked about each thing, like each version? What Epic mechanics are like universally, by regardless of what edition you play, what people liked? And it was very easy to answer some things. And like, first of all, we used the army card system from second edition, because from the feedback of people who play diverse kind of editions, they liked how easy that was. And it is easy. You need no pencil, you need no paper, you just need a bunch of cards.
Yeah.
And that's a game within the game itself. Huh? I mean, how many Epic fans have sat down, not even playing the game, and you just threw the cards out on the table or the floor and made up armies? Just made up. I said, okay, look, this looks interesting. I'll try this in this next game. That is very engaging. And those are the kind of things that David and I were looking at when we made Imperius. What is engaging? What people like? And that's one example.
I mean, that's a great example because my pal, he talks about it quite a lot about that's part of his resistance to other systems, because he loved that little sub game, if you like, of just throwing the cards down, and it was so simple and intuitive that it was like, okay, you get one company card, one special card, and up to 5 support cards. Brilliant. It was really simple and it was a great system. So yeah, I thought that was really a smart thing to latch on to as part of Imperius Dominatus.
Another thing we tried to do was streamline time-consuming rules.
Mm-hmm.
Things that used to take a lot of time to figure out in NetEpic that would slow the game down. For example, hop swat guns, barrage templates, anything that revolved rolling more dice, like scatter dice, hit locations, things that would cause problems with people to target units because template on or off. All that stuff we try to avoid and clean up to make the game flow a smoother way.
Yeah, we have this post pinned to the Imperius Dominatus webpage, which is Imperius Dominatus' design philosophy, which you covered. And what David just expressed is what we call simplicity. Now, simplicity doesn't mean simple and boring. It just means streamline. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to eliminate what a lot of Epic players normally did of having to look up stuff. Nobody has perfect recall. And nobody really likes having too many subsystems within one rule set. So Imperius Dominatus made everything on a baseline level. That means a Titan follows the same rules as the infantryman, which we all know from diverse Epic rule sets. It's always an issue. How do you make that something flavorful and interesting and engaging, but without this extra shell and subsystems of rules? So we did that with basically everything. We wanted one unified system. That means the same way you shoot for the infantry stand is the same way you shoot for the Titan. The same way damage is resolved for the first is also resolved for the latter, and everything else in between. And the way we did it was that we designed a basic rule set mechanic, but then we gave the flavor by adding on the different abilities. And they're not special rules. They're just something you tack onto a unit to make it different from other units, but they still all follow the same. They have the same stat line. They use the same dice. And I guess we're now going to go into the next question, which is why the D10?
So Gordon asked a question about why we changed from D6s to D10s. I consider dice as a tool, and the tool with more variance or more randomness allows to create more interesting and more detailed points of interest. For example, 1 to 6 is 17% or 16.5% chance per pip. 1 to 10 is 10% chance. You can do more with a D10 than you can do more with it than a D6. That was interesting. That was it.
That's basically what you've heard on the internet called granularity. The D10 has more granularity than D6, but it just goes beyond that. The D10 has 4 more faces than the D6. There are some practical considerations here. People think in decimal. So it's easier to count by 10. Everybody knows how to count by 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It's less easy to count in sixes or in that probability line. So that's one thing. And if you notice a trend, again, it goes back to simplicity. We want people to have to remember the less and look up the less possible things during gaming time, because gaming time is precious. So we have to cut out everything that's not, directly related to the fun. So, but the D10 does something really important that me and David realized very quickly. And I will give very practical examples that everybody that's played the Epic game knows. When you have a D6, it is very difficult to differentiate units from one another. How many Epic rule sets where you basically have infantry and vehicles have the same save value or to hit value or any of the other values in the game?
Case in point, NetEpic Tactical Marines. Big whoop. They're not impressive at all.
Right. Because in second edition, nobody has saves. You shoot them, they die. Sure, the CAF is different, but again, one thing is difference and one thing is statistical. In other words, meaningful difference when you play. A lot of differences in many of the Epic rule sets are not meaningful in the field of play. So a D10 gives you the spread enough to have that meaningful impact. But the really good thing about the D10 is we eliminated a lot of extra rules. When you have less granularity, as in the D6, you have to make up rules, because if two units have similar stats and one's infantry and one vehicle, how do you tell them apart on the field play? Well, you make rules for them. Then you get into anti-personnel or armor piercing. And we all know for our preferred epic rule sets of the older ones, what degree these rules can become. And sometimes they become quite taxing. Sometimes they become even contradictory, or sometimes they just become confusing, hard to remember because of specific things that happen to the game.
One thing too was the hit rolls of a 7+ in Net Epic. That's just bad game design, that you have to roll D6 and then roll a 4 or 5 or 6, depends.
Exactly.
Like the probabilities of that number
Yes.
of 2D6 is so screwed up.
Yep.
Compared to a straight dice.
And there's a psychological component in it, because when we design Imperius Dominatus, it's not all the things we talk about, simplicity. We don't want you to look up things. We want it to be engaging. And the term me and David use a lot is tension. Things that create tension in a game are good. Things that detract from them are bad. And what you described is a good example, is because players instinctively know what's advantageous and what's not. So basically telling somebody that a 7 to hit or something, you have to roll another dice, is so difficult that what's the end result? The end result is that you don't do it. And the contrary to that, if it makes it so easy to hit in that case, then you do it all the time, and then you run into balance issues. So the D10, it has a chain effect. It not only adds more variety, but it gets rid of more exception-based design.
Game design too was also the fact we want players to have fun. Is it fun? That was a question we always asked. Should we allow a player to try to do this? Yes, we could let them do it. If they need a 10 to do it, well, they'll still try, but who cares? We let them do it. So we never try to prevent or create rules that didn't let players try to do something. We just gave them bad odds to do it, but could still do it if they got lucky.
And even if the odds were bad, they were still infinitely better than the odds, just from a purely numerical level, than what a D6 would allow you to. Because that also ties into like the bonuses and penalties. And D6 based design, really the only thing that can tolerate is +1, +2, just from a statistical point of view. The problem is that in D6 based design, you see a lot of +2s and even more. A +2 or a -2 on a D6 is the same thing as saying you're going to fail or you're always going to succeed. And that detracts tension, like I mentioned before, because if you know something is not only not likely, but very likely to be almost impossible, the player will do it, because you only have a finite amount of actions within a game as well as a finite amount of time. And people want the things that they do, the roles that they make, to be meaningful. Curiously enough, the +2, -2 works perfectly on a D10 just because it has a better probability spread. So it has more meaning in those things. And like David said, yeah, something might be really difficult, but there's certain circumstances in the game that make you get bonuses that make it less hard. But there's nothing that's impossible, or there's nothing that's a gimme, because everything's been spread out on a continuum that lets players try, and nothing seems impossible, improbable, yes, or less probable, more probable, but not impossible. So removing the no, because that's what a lot of game design is, no and yes. We wanted to remove the no while making the yes viable, but not all the yeses were probable. But you let the player decide, okay, I'm going to take that risk because maybe it's only a 20%, but hey, if it happens to go through, great. Not the inferior single digits, or sometimes even less probability that the same situation in other game systems with D6 would allow. So we thought about all these things, because a game design is not just the meat and potatoes of the mechanics. People play games, and people have specific ways to react to things. Is one key design feature of Imperius Dominatus that we figure out early on that's very different from the traditional epic games. And traditional epic games, to hit is the thing. What I mean by that is that to hit in second edition, first edition, Epic 40K, EA, that's the end all be all, because the hitting is the difficult part. Once you get that hurdle, yes, there might be armor saves, but from a probabilistic point of view, the survival rate's not very high. Just second edition, for example. The average to hit is a 5, right? I mean, in fact, 90% of the units in the game hit with a 5+, which in itself is kind of bad design, but it serves to illustrate the point. So what does that tell you? It means that you're going to just hit 32% of the times, roughly 33% of the time. If you add a -1 to that, it drops by half, 16. If you put a -2 on it, you're already in the extra reroll that David, and the probabilities there are single digit, low single digits. The problem with that is that people, when they roll, players like rolling dice and feeling they're doing something when they roll dice. If they're rolling dice, how many times have we played games and people roll dice was like, oh yeah, that was a wasted roll, that was a waste of time. We don't want people to feel that way.
So to follow that logic there, Peter, what we did in ID that was different from all previous games is that we gave an army to hit roll. So the whole army fires every single gun at the same hit chance. They fight in close combat at the same hit chance. So different armies could have the same gun, but they might not shoot or hit as well with it. So that's a way to show that these forces are elite compared to regular forces. So Imperial Guard and Space Marines hit better, shoot better, fight better than the average Imperial Guard troop. That is important. It costs more points for these troops, but they're going to do more damage and they'll be much more consistent fighting in table. They'll be harder to take out. So that's an interesting point. Before, like Thunder cannons and Net Epic, everything was a different hit chance, not an ID.
Basically, what we said was that the army, due to its training and morale, would more or less have a certain degree of accuracy. So why? It's not the weapon that's accurate; it's the fire that's accurate. And if the fire is a Marine, what difference does it make what he's shooting? He's going to be equally good or equally bad, depending on the race. So, and more importantly, you just got to remember one roll.
Yeah, that was the bit I was about to say. That was, for me, as somebody that has problems with their memory for some of the stat things. I thought that was a really genius move, that it meant no matter what was firing, whether it was infantry, vehicles, or whatever.
Well, yeah, those are things that perhaps people don't think about, but that's important stuff. I mean, people's time is valuable. So you want, when you play a game, you want to spend the time in what produces the most amount of fun. Looking up stuff to proceed a game is not necessarily funny. You know, it detracts from the experience as well as perhaps using valuable time you could use having fun playing the game.
That's why the cards are handy too, because they have the data lines on them too.
Exactly. Now, going back to what I was making, in Imperius Dominatus, hitting is easy. That's why we give you so many attack dice to do it with. Why? Because people feel engaged when they're rolling dice. Look, I'm getting hit. I'm getting hits. In normal Epic games from the previous editions, hitting was hard. You missed a lot. And that also engenders a sense in people's like, well, you know, oh, look, I fired my Lehman Rust attachment. I didn't get any hits. What a waste. And people may not verbalize it that way, but that's how they feel.
Yeah, they feel frustrated. Yeah.
They feel frustrated, right? And how many times you see people take, this die is bad luck. You know, gamers, we're all superstitious. Let me change the color. That's it. Not that matters, but that's what we do. We all do that. In ID, we said, okay, we're going to switch the emphasis from hitting to making the save. Now, this has a dual purpose. Number one, you get the psychological gratification of hitting because you never feel like you're wasting shots, because it's very rare in Imperius Dominatus not to get hits. But if hits is one thing, casualties is another. In previous Epic games, hitting was almost equal to casualties because the armor, the way the armor systems are made, the saves were either too small to matter and the save modifier is too big to basically nullify them. So there was a very little difference between, like in second edition, for example, you hit infantry stands, they're dead, right? They don't have a save. So what difference does it make? A hit equals kill. Against the vehicles, that would depend on the save, but the saves weren't that great. Save 4, save 5, sometimes a save at 6.
So in this case, I took 40k rules. So a Marine firing in Marine would have to hit, they would have to do a wound roll, and they would have to do an armor save. So basically, that's why in ID, Marine has a 6+ armor save on a D10 for an infantry stand, which is unheard of anywhere before. But that means they can actually survive 50% of normal shots.
Yeah. And then more importantly, they act like Marines.
That's tough. Like, that's a tough unit for infantry stand. That's as tough as like a light vehicle.
And of course, they will behave on the tabletop, because that's the other one of our philosophies. You want things to behave on the tabletop like you imagine them to be, because that's all we do when we play with our little soldiers, isn't it? We imagine we're the commander in there, and oh, look at this guy, they're shooting at them. We kind of imagine in our heads what's going on in like a mini story. So it's sometimes disappointing or disheartening when the rules don't kind of meet up your expectation in your head. And how many conversation have we had over the year that this unit's not worth it, or these Marines who will take tacticals, for example, which is a common one in second edition, and so on and so forth. ID
Guilty.
eliminates that. Yeah, that's why I said it, because I know you say it all the time. That's what ID eliminated now. Now, granted, your Marines are much more expensive and will be outnumbered by Imperial Guard or Orc analogous units, because that's the name of the game. You get good stuff, but you will be outnumbered most of the time. And again, that's a very 40K, 30K kind of feel, right? Marines are always outnumbered, but they're so badasses that they can take on many times their number. And this is where David's work was crucial. See, one big criticism I've always had of Games Workshop, of all their rules, this is 40K, whatever, they do not have a systematic way to give stats to units and to cost them. And I'll let David explain what that means.
So the use of a D10 behind the scenes and design-wise was extremely important. In the 7th edition, 40K and 30K, they had armor values of vehicles. They started at 14, and that would be for like Land Raider, and a bike would have armor 10. And anything under that would be used toughness. Again, that's a D6-based system. So you have 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. That's basically 5 pips. And they actually had 15 armor in a Armageddon book for a Warlord Titan. So that's 6 pips of armor I could do on a D10. So, and then we have carapace armor, we have flak armor, we have chitin. So I decided, well, how can I represent infantry, different types of infantry armor, different types of vehicle armor, and different toughnesses for creatures? So Mega Gargants and stuff are very, very tough. If you use mechanics from 40K, you have to wound them. So the wounding them at the high toughness they have is like a form of armor, because it's harder to hurt them. So I incorporated modifiers to armor based on toughness and the armor values from 7th edition, translated them into ID. I also used hit DR, which is damage resolution or damage points, from balancing 8th edition and 7th edition statistics for all the vehicles. I took the movement values of 8th edition, because in 7th they used to use initiative. I took those values from 8th edition to determine how fast the troops would move in ID, and I have charts for all movement speeds. So there's a combination of many types of rule systems to get to the stats where ID are at right now. I think it worked out really well, though.
Yeah. Well, and the point is that unlike what most of the time rule sets with GW are, David actually did a repeatable, systematic conversion of what things look like in 40K and 30K into ID rules. And the importance of that is that not only is it repeatable, right? I'm not just pulling stats out of the air. I said, oh yeah, I think you should have a stat of this. No, everything.
Anything you give, any new thing comes out, I can make a stat for it. Follow my formula.
Exactly. And more importantly, they get costed in an equivalent manner. Because the thing is not what units cost. The thing is that everybody has their stats valuated the same and applied the same. Because there is no difference in saying, okay, in Imperius Dominatus, a tactical company is worth 750, as saying it's worth 500. In that sense, the numbers don't have meaning in and of themselves. But what David did was, since he ported over everything in specific, repeatable, systematic quantities, everybody gets the same treatment. That means if this is worth 750, something like it will be worth 750, and something lesser will be worth less, and something better will be worth more. And that's very important, because that is one of the cornerstones to balance in a game. And how many times have we basically complained in all epic versions that this one's undervalued or this one's overvalued? How many times have we heard in epic games where, oh, this unit has no use? Well, usually it has no use either because the stats don't really represent what it could do, or the cost is off, and therefore players, being players, will gravitate towards what they think is a better deal or lesser deal. Imperius Dominatus did away with that. Since everybody is given things on an equal footing, that means there's value anywhere you look. And all that's left is the tactical value that you as a player give them. There's no wasted units. There's no, oh, this doesn't work as well as that. Because if something doesn't work as well as that, that means that in our system, it costs less. Therefore, you can bring more, making it impactful in that manner. Like, quantity is quality of its own, so to speak. And on the other end, you have, oh, well, I don't get a lot of these, but they're very powerful. But the genius of what David did was that it was equitable. It's equivalent. If I port over this Marine to here, it is always worth this in Imperius Dominatus. If I import this Orc over here, that is what is worth, because its stats relative to the first are different. And like I said, it's not the value, it's the application of the value. And our application of the value was equal across the board to all units. So that in and of itself guarantees that you'll have balance. And everybody wants a level playing field, right? I mean, how many times you've played where, you're bringing that unit, which everybody kind of knows is a little bit undervalued for the potency it has in game. We did away with that doing this system. And I think that's a very important thing that we give a lot of thought to. And, we don't bore people with like the numbers behind all this, but there are numbers behind it. There's hit ratios, kill ratios, all these stuff that I sometimes blather about the table when we talk about game design.
Oh, it takes a long time to figure it all out too.
Yeah, but that's important because Marines are really accurate, right? So that means their attack dice will get more hits. And the more hits, the more probability you have to inflict armor saves, which means the more probability you will fail armor saves or make armor saves, and that's the kill ratio. So we did all those calculations for you. You never need to see these in games, but you will feel the effect of them in game because that's how the units will behave. And we're very cognizant of that. And that's like the base system. And by the way, as David mentioned before, there are no subsystems here. Artillery works the same way as shooting. Close combat works the same way as shooting. Yes, there are nuances in all of those things because we know that they have a different role, right, when you play the game. But that doesn't mean because they have a different role and impact, I have to make different subsystems for you, the player, to remember. I don't want you to remember stuff. I want you to play the game and have fun.
The whole point is to make it fun and to try and get rid of power gaming type of things.
Yeah, we think a lot about that.
So, for example, a Warlord Titan with a Vortex missile or a Warp missile. If you could always just pick one of those things are just nasty. They're not much fun to play against because they pretty much, if they hit, they'd kill you.
Yeah.
So I made a random chart for what kind of missiles you get. Supply line, whatever, stuff like that.
That's the other thing. What he's pointing out is something that's lore. A lot of the stuff we do is not only for the balance and the gaming aspects of it, but we found ourselves in lore as well. And in lore, you don't get to just say, oh, okay, somebody put a vortex missile on my Titan. Those things are rare. And only like high-level princeps get that kind of stuff. Now, maybe at some point we'll introduce some kind of experience system, so for people who like that as an optional add-on. But for now, the table that David mentioned is good enough. It's like, well, do you have the pull, aka the luck to get on the dice the specific one you want? Well, there you go. But you got to pay for the points, and then you got to live with the result you get. Because as in real life, sometimes you don't get all you want. But we always think about these because, look, players are players. They're always trying to try to get the best out of what they design. So we have to look at everything we do and say, well, how exploitable is it? Now, granted, not everything is going to be as exploit-proof as you want, but you can, through design, mitigate at least what would be more onerous or egregious, and at least keep that under a very low probability that if somebody wants to try it, like we said, we want you to say yes, not no. You try, but going in that there's a difference in the probability of trying different things. Everything in the game, from the numbers to the stats and everything, were made of very tight parameters. So, for example, you won't see to hits inferior to 4, right? Because if you got bonuses of +2, anything inferior, that is basically saying you auto hit. In the same manner, we don't have stats on the higher end of the die because we know if you introduce penalties, that'll be impossible. So
a 10 will always hit. A 10 will always hit.
Yeah, no matter what you like. And then we have a rule, which is actual rule, the rule of 2s. No matter what bonuses or penalties the rules or your abilities may give you, they cannot stack more than +2 in one way or -2 in the other. Easy to remember. So you don't have to be figuring out, oh, well, this apply? Does this stack? I mean, how many times have you asked this playing Epic in any version? Does this stack with this? Is this compatible with that? We don't want you guys to do any of that. So we just kept it really simple. We know that there's a wide variety of different abilities that can give you a lot of different bonuses and or penalties to whatever's going on in the game. But at the end, +2, -2. That's it. You go over, if you add them all up and you went over 2, and anybody could count to 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, either way. That's it. And that's the other one of our philosophies, at a glance. At a glance means exactly what it says. We want all the information of the game to be as visually accessible as possible. We don't want you to have to remember anything. We don't want you to have to look up anything. So as you go through the mechanics, you will find that literally everything is just looking at something, either your dice or at a table, which we made reference sheets for, at the orders, or at your army card, which we also put as much information as we could on that as well. All in an attempt to reduce as much lookup time as possible. Because again, time is finite and time is precious. And all the time you spend on ID, we want it to be fun. We don't want you to look up stuff.
And although also the time to design it. It's only Peter and myself doing this, so we can't cover everything. We try to make it as 100% accurate or as good as we can, but Peter has got a lot of playtesters looking for bugs and looking for unbalanced things, and that's important too.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's only as good as the people who play it out. We've had a lot of feedback. It's a question for a little bit later, so I'll cut it there. But yes, as part as things that don't necessarily distinguish, because there are other epic rules that have touched upon, there are the scenarios. Now, one thing I learned from playing Epic, especially the older versions one, it does get a little bit repetitive because everybody just sets up on this side of the table, puts whatever amount of objectives they're going to use, and have at it. I think that's one of the things the later editions of the game had in their favor because it gives variety. Nobody wants to play the same thing over and over again because it gets kind of stale. So the scenarios were very important. And these scenarios we took for ID are actually 40K scenarios. I mean, we didn't come up with anything original here. We just looked at 40K and said, oh, look, these scenarios look pretty cool. So let's port them over and make them suitable for Epic play. But they're there for 2 reasons. One, the older systems tend to be a little bit too open-ended. Sure, you play to a certain amount of victory points, but we found that the amount of time the games took were kind of too uniform. And of course, the scenario was always the same, which was kind of, after a while, gets a little bit boring. So we gave 6 scenarios, 7 if you count the siege one, which is a specialized scenario. But we also gave them a turn limit. And it's not that the game ends at that point. There's a possibility that it can continue, just much like it works in 40K. You roll a dice, and if it's equal or less than the turns that you've played, it stops. If it doesn't, it continues. But it gives that variability that players that they like. Again, the word tension. If you don't know when the game's going to end, you can't kind of do that gamesmanship thing we all do when we know that the game's close to ending. We start doing weird and non-tactical things because we're just going for the win, right?
Yeah. I had a habit of when I knew the last turn was the next turn was going to be victory because we were getting close to the threshold. I'm sure Craig would attest to this, that he's seen me, suddenly my rhinos make a bolt into enemy territory. They've dropped off their troops, they've been sitting doing nothing, and then suddenly the whole lot suddenly starts ploughing across the battlefield and trying to steal objectives in their half. So that was something that happened a lot in our games.
Yeah, you described it perfectly because everybody, if you know when the game's going to end, you start doing things that you would not do when this game hangs in the balance. So ID took care of that very easily. Now you do not know when the game's going to end. You got an idea. Maybe it'll end at turn 6, but maybe not. And but if it continues and you do those kind of things that you would normally do in other Epic rule sets, you're taking a big gamble because if the game lasts longer than that, you've overextended itself and you end up losing when it was looking pretty good for you. And also, we did the scenarios where we wanted both sides to have things to do. So it's not, while objectives in the old game, and most of the old games, is the thing that people fought over, we said, that's a little bit stale too, because how many times can you fight over the same thing? So we introduced a lot of little secondary objectives. Well, yeah, that first objective is the thing we're going after, but we can also accomplish victory if we do a lot of these secondary ones. So that means that you could not preemptively gamesmanship your way out of saying, okay, well, since everybody's going for this thing, well, there's not much else I have to worry about. No, now you got to worry about a whole host of things that can give your opponent the victory if you ignore them. And I think, again, that adds tension. And we always want to add tension to the game because uncertainty in the game is a good thing because that means I do not know the outcome before the outcome is finalized, which is at the actual end of the game.
There's also another way that has been modified slightly that you haven't seen yet, Peter, which I'm working on. For example, I'm working on the Dark Elder, called a different name, the Dukari. If they kill and wipe out an entire infantry unit, they get an extra victory point because they're slaves. So I'm adding that kind of detail to some armies.
Right. That would go into actually one of our next questions was the 40K aspect of it. Because the reason we did 30K is because this is how the idea started, right? I was interested in 30K, so we did that. And truth be told, I believe EA has a couple of supplements out there created by fans that do 30K, but there's not really an all-encompassing, comprehensive 30K rule set. So we wanted to start with that because, there is a certain degree of popularity of 30K. But of course, at the end of the day, most fans of Epic play in 40K universe and times. So just to update people what's going on, and that's where I had a conversation with Gordon before we started. And this is where David gets to tell you, okay, David, what you've created, what's finalized to be formatted, and what's upcoming.
So Gordon asked about 40K. That's the next part. We've done 30K, which is, it's done, right? Everything's done for 30K. All the armies, everything's done. It's just figuring out some minor details. 40K, the Orcs are done. The Eldar are done. I'm working on Necrons. There's a couple of Dark Elder things to fix. So for Eldar, I did the Craft Worlds. I did the Exodites. I did Drukari, the Dark Eldar. I did Harlequins. Orcs have, I don't know, about 70 different vehicles and units now compared to 25 at Epic. So everything the last 25 years they made for Orcs is now incorporated into ID. It's just up to Peter to type it out.
Yeah, that's what David means by done. Yeah, the design part of it is done. Now, just in case people didn't know, David basically designs everything, right? He did the paradigms to systematically port over everything. He lays out all the stats. He lays out all the units. And then my end of the deal is to get all that and format it and make sure that it's in keeping with all the rules and whatnot. So basically, I do the rule books, the army cards, the formatting, and making sure everything is balanced and everything. So when he tells you something's done, it's designed, but now I have to get off my lazy butt and actually get it to you guys. So if you have to blame somebody, blame me, because I'm the one who hasn't been sitting down getting those things ready for you to play with.
Well, also Peter made it hard for himself because he took it upon himself to learn how to do the silhouettes on the cards. So that's probably half the job there.
Yeah. So we always like everybody's input and help, but we realize that this is a hobby related thing, and people have real life concerns and responsibilities and all that. But at the end of the day, it's pretty much up on David and my shoulders. We each have our duties and responsibilities. He comes up with everything, and I can tell you point blank that that's not my forte, never has. I'm not very good at it. And my forte is basically formatting and getting the graphical aspects done. So like, as he mentioned, I learned how to do silhouetting. So I make the army cards, tokens, and everything else. So basically the thing you see might be made by me, but everything that's in there as far as starts and everything was created by David. So it's a 1-2 thing. He has to do his part before I do my part.
And I couldn't do Peter's part. I don't have the patience to do all that kind of stuff, and he's so good at it.
Well, that's why we get along so well, because he does the stuff I don't like, and I do the stuff he doesn't like.
Yeah, your skill sets complement each other.
Yes, it does. But just to let people know, I've mentioned this on the Imperius Dominatus website. Been struggling a little bit with asthma, but I'm feeling much better now. It's under control. So I look forward to getting back and doing this stuff. And as David knows, he needs to have a pretty long head start ahead of me in creating things, because when I sit down and do stuff, it gets done.
Yeah, you do it quick for sure.
So I would expect Orcs and Eldar and stuff by the summer. So it's not as far away as you would think. It'll get done pretty quick.
The structure of 40K is going to be slightly different than 30K. 30K is basically a civil war. So everyone's got the same troops. Everyone got the same units. The only way to make that slightly interesting is to have different chapters have different traits that apply to their troops.
Mm-hmm.
So the White Scars are different than the Ultramarines, etc. And all those traits have a points value associated to them. So at that time, 30K stuff is all about 400 points worth of traits per army. And there's a section in the rules that determines how that works when you have allies and everything.
That's called the army value.
In 40K, I reduced that to about 200 points. So they're not going to be quite as detailed as 30K because there's so many more armies and troop types and units available. That's where the difference is going to be in the armies. So Orcs are going to be different than the Space Marines and Imperial Guard. So I figured I could reduce the traits a little bit and have, because there's so many different clans of orcs, there's so many different troops of harlequins, there's so many different craft worlds, it would make those generic points for that race. Eldar would have generic traits, and then they would have specific traits for each craft world to make them slightly different.
Yeah, because it's also important that they feel like it's 40K, right? 30K, it's its own thing, and 40K, it's its own thing. So that just highlights a nice little difference between the two by doing the traits that way.
So another way we could use our D10 rolls, we can differentiate between range shooting and close combat. For example, the Tau shoot pretty well, but they don't fight close combat very well. Orcs tend to fight better in close combat, and they shoot poorly. Marines are good at everything. Eldar are really good at shooting and decent at close combat. So I can have a to-hit roll for ranged and have a to-hit roll for close combat for every single race, and they can all be different. It's such a small thing, but it adds flavor to the game.
Plus, it's easier to remember. 1, 2. That might not be 1, but it's 2. You don't have to look up anything.
And that's about every single unit ever made for 40K will be in ID.
Yes. So the question we get most asked is, or what are we doing for 40K? And the short answer is everything. In time, everything that is out there, as David said, will be done. It's just a matter of creating it and formatting it and getting it out to you. So 40K will be made available in its entirety as time goes by.
Even stuff that isn't in 40K, that's, for example, Necrons with their megaliths and the abattoirs and things like that, the planet killers and planet harvesters. I'm making rules for those because those are actually written up in some places.
And then this is like very long term. It's probably the last one we will do, but squats will make a comeback in ID, but that'll be a much more novel approach because, truth be told, that is not a supported race by Games Workshop anymore. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it is time to get the community involved and to see what they should be as an army. Of course, the legacy units will be there. That's always a thing that we do. But, what else should be there for them? And that'll be a fun little discussion towards the end where...
Well, don't worry about that, Peter. That's one of my biggest armies, so I got that covered.
So, in summary, in time, we will get to all those things there.
With it being based so much on 30K and 40K, I mean, one of the big problems Epic's faced over the years has been the fact that we're all of a certain age. Let's just put it that way. We're all people who were into the game when it was actually launched and live and was happening. And I think most of us have all had kind of points where we've been really active with it and then we've kind of dropped out and come back in later on in life. And I was wondering, is that maybe part of the idea as well? Because obviously 40,000 is the big game for Games Workshop. The fact that people there's going to be that kind of straight porting, if you like, not straight, but you know what I mean, what you were kind of describing there, David, that might attract a new audience into Epic. I was wondering if that was something that was on your minds at all.
Absolutely.
Yes, I believe that could happen. Well, with the new Adeptus Titanicus models coming out, people buy those. They like the Titans because they can afford to have a bunch of them now compared to one big warlord that costs, £1,200 or something. And with 3D printing, there's so many people who don't have any old figures. They're making new ones for Epic.
And there's a few more suppliers now as well. Of course, there's a few other, third parties that are...
Oh, yes. Vanguard and Onslaught and all these different companies and Microworld Games.
Exactly. We heavily recommend people to use the proxies offered by either Vanguard Miniatures or Onslaught because they are pretty much the 2 6mm manufacturers that cater to our kind of gaming. So if you have not heard of them, I certainly would urge you to look on their offering sets. In the case of Vanguard Miniatures in particular, they have a whole line that is immensely compatible with 30K. So there are options out there. So I would definitely recommend people to look. And the answer to Gordon's question is yes, we always have the back on our mind. Yes, we know there's an existing Epic community that plays, and they are relatively easier to cater to since they already have the stuff they want. And ID will include a lot of the legacy stuff, and it will be easy for them to kind of like reorder their models to play a game of it if they shows. But we thought it equally important to appeal to people who've never played Epic before. And the only way you're going to do that in modern times is that it looks like modern 40K. And I think that's a very big hamstring that the older Epic systems have, because if you're new to 40K and you look at a chaos list and you ask where the obliterator's at, what am I going to tell you? Well, I'm going to tell you they're not there unless, of course, you go to ID. When we do the chaos list, they will be there. So there is something to be said that a game should try to appeal to all generations of Epic players. And that's one thing that ID tries to do. We want you to use your models in whatever shape or form they are. But we also want people that are new to find the game attractive and look like what's pulling them in, right? We can all remember what we found attractive about the 40K universe, and that's why we still play with these things after so many years. So I think that we should return the courtesy to newer people, not necessarily familiar with Epic, that when they look at our rule set, they said, yeah, I know what that is. I saw that in a 40K book or a 40K magazine. And oddly enough, from the feedback we've been getting, we have people who never played Epic that are joining our groups and getting really into the rules because they felt kind of left aside when they look at older rule sets because they can recognize some of the units, but a lot of what they like from the modern 40K is not present. So ID is addressing a real need. And another thing is that since we've made a rule set that draws from all Epic rule sets and even rule sets that are not Epic, so because like I said at the beginning, we left our perspectives very open as far as mechanics. We're getting adepts and converts of all Epic, the previous Epic versions, and funnily enough, we're getting a lot of EA people into it as well, which I thought was rather pleasing because and a lot of feedback we've gotten are from those kind of players. So there's a real need for something different that kind of captures what the expectations are of a lot of people as far as what Epic means and how it should play. But it's also not going to be directed at just one generation. We want it to appeal to everybody, the new and the old. And I think they all have a place in ID.
Speaking of old, the every model they ever made for Epic, I made rules for. Nothing is missing.
Correct.
So all the old stuff, all the new stuff, everything I could find, I put it in.
Yeah, and so it's all there. Cards will be made for all of it. So whatever era you decide to game in, those things will be there, and then they'll be there in a meaningful fashion for you to create your armies and however you see fit.
Well, there's one more little point I wanted to say. When we first started this, you were so used to running rules for NetEpic, and when I came in, I didn't like a rule, I would scrap it. There's a lot of times that I scrapped something, gave you an alternative, and you said, "Wow, why didn't we never did that before?" Do you remember that?
That is correct. Yeah, many times. It's not just once.
We got rid of I don't know how many pages of rules compared to other.
Yes, every time we would our rule set is, I think at last count was 70 something pages. I mean, if you take account of what most rule books are, just the rules, I mean, it's pretty concise. And that's counting the graphics and all that kind of stuff. The point was that, I mean, you have to think out of the box sometimes. Everybody wants to just kind of think of things in a certain way, but we wanted to make them approachable to anyone. And we use the mindset of someone that knows nothing of Epic, because it's really easy to assume and make rules for people who know about Epic, right? Because they can fill in the blanks because they have the experience of having played diverse rule sets. But when we did things, we did it from the point of view, okay, I never played Epic before, and I read it, and we had people read the rules with that mindset. In other words, people who are not within the Epic inner circle, so to speak, or the Epic community, people who have many very interesting rule changes were made by people who just looked at it from an outsider perspective. And I think that's really important because at the end of the day, if we wanted to make a rule set just for ourselves, we didn't have to make it public, right? At the end of the day, you have to make a rule set where anyone can read. And for those who would be interested in looking them up and checking them out, I've always said that you can't have a net version of the rules without an internet website. And that was one of the pillars of NetEpic's success. And I hope it to be one of the pillars of Imperius Dominatus' success. So our website is very simple. It's the name of the game, imperiusdominatus.org. All the recent rule sets are there. It's all downloadable individually as well as one big file for those who like to do it that way. And all the updates and whatnot that be the official current rule set will be uploaded those. For those who want a more hands-on approach to what's being spoken and wish to voice their feedback, we have a Facebook page, which is called just like the game, Imperius Dominatus, Warfare in the Age of Horus, and the Dark Imperium, which anyone, if they choose to honor us, can join. We're already at 650 members. Not bad when we started with just 20. So we are growing by leaps and bounds. We hope to hit 1,000 at some point when we start pumping out the 40K list. So as always,
Feedback's always welcome, and especially for Peter,
yes, you took the words right out of my mouth.
typos and details that seem off, please let us know because we're always trying to fix everything. And
Yeah, I mean, we have a thread on the Facebook group for typos and new ideas and extra ideas and things to add. And every time I sit down, I make an update. I just take all that's there in consideration and put it in there. So the game is constantly evolving.
so far, 30K, there's been very limited people asking for change. I think only 3 changes we made so far, so people seem satisfied.
Yeah, more modifications. Yes, the feedback has been generally very positive, very engaging. I thank everyone that has done so far, and encourage anyone else to do that. That's just part of what I learned in that epic. Everybody has meaningful ideas. And even if in the end they may not be modified in the same vein, you may have the kernel of an idea that with some modifications will make the rule set better. And at the end of the day, if you guys are playing it or trying it out, you're the voices we want to hear, because that's why we're making the game for people to have fun with.
Yeah, and I'll drop the links on beneath the video or the podcast, wherever you're listening to it. We'll make sure those links are there for you, that you can just click on them and jump to the sites and see what it's all about, because hopefully that'll be exciting for people to discover a new way to play Epic. That, and as you say, David, by covering all the units, no matter what armor you've got, there'll be something there for you that you can use, and there'll be no holes, there'll be no gaps.
We realize that a lot of people wait for the 40K stuff, so I promise I'll get off my butt and start pumping it out for you, because I know that's by far the most popular component to Epic, and I think Imperius Dominatus will grow exponentially once those 40K lists start coming out, especially the non-human ones.
Well, you're going to be doing Orcs and Eldar first, because you can actually use them in 30K as well. So it's not.
That is correct. So the first list to be released will be the Orcs, followed on its heels by the Eldar, and then the others as they are created. They will be announced, of course, on the Facebook page as well as the website. And I also do some PR for that on the more populous Epic list as well when things are released, just so people to have knowledge of what's going on.
The Orcs should surprise a lot of people. I think the Orcs are going to be much more fun than before. As an example, Vanguard and Games Workshop made these super heavy bombers from Forge World, and I made it can carry paratroops. So you can launch a full company of Orcs out of a heavy bomber and land them as paratroopers in Epic, which has never been done before in any rule set.
So yeah, it has the balance of any ID army list, but we made sure that it had the flavor and the character that I know people like when they play, because that's what you play 40K for. You want orky stuff to behave orkily, so they will behave orkily and then some. We hope people will enjoy it once I get it out.
Sounds great. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to play it.
No, I'm really waiting for Peter to put the Orcs out, because I think the feedback is going to be, people are going to go, wow, they're going to just be impressed by the crazy list.
Yeah, it's very orky.
Well, I suppose one of the other final questions I was going to ask you there was, obviously we've been in to various degrees in different countries. Obviously, I'm not sure how strict it's been over in America, but over here in the UK, we've basically been in a virtual lockdown almost for a year, for over a year now. And I was wondering if you've heard any kind of people talking about planning a Splurger Games once it's over, once they can meet up with people again, or...
Well, I guess it varies much from region to region, right? Because different countries are going through different restrictions and different. At least in the U.S., I know a lot of people still have the games, but then they might be a little bit more close knit and had contact prior to the pandemic and whatnot. But yes, a lot of people are itching to get back out there and have games and whatnot. I guess, even me personally, I haven't played a game with someone in quite a long time, and I was speaking with Harvey Kitzman, which some of you may know from Facebook and TACCOMs. He lives in Texas, not too far away from me. So I'm planning on getting some games in the summer, pandemic and time permitting. So yeah, I think a lot of people are planning things when things return to normality. But it is what it is with the pandemic. We're just going to have to be patient.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, I think a lot of people have returned to Epic. I mean, one of the things I've noticed across social media is there seems to be a lot of people who have suddenly started dusting off their armies because they've suddenly found they've got time now, and possibly because of the certain period there that their life, what I was saying earlier on about the age that we all are, that I suspect there's some people whose kids have now grown up and they now have more time, but because of the pandemic, they've been locked down, they've suddenly started painting stuff. So I'm hoping that at the end of this, that means that there's going to be a whole lot of people suddenly playing Epic again, and whatever guys it is. But I'm hoping, because there's a new guys in the block with a new system, that you'll get a lot of that bonus or whatever you want to call it, that new interest in Epic again.
Nostalgic interest, yes.
Yeah, I think once things would return to normal, as things often are, you get that boom right after it where people start doing a lot of stuff that they were probably deprived of doing due to the restrictive conditions. So I think there'll be a lot of gaming in everybody's future, mine included.
But the people have just been stuck at home, so they've been going through all their storage lockers and boxes they had under the stairs and just figuring out what they have. They're rediscovering all this old Epic stuff, and they had good memories about it. And they looking up, who's playing this? How does it work? And
in a certain sense, I think we're kind of living almost in a renewed golden age for Epic. I mean, you got companies pumping out a lot of really good proxies. You got Games Workshop taking out Titans and other Aeronautica Imperialis for planes that you can certainly use in your Epic game. And the 3D files, I mean, I think finally we're kind of seeing the threshold of where this is becoming very widespread and very used by all. So yeah, Epic is kind of opening up itself now in a very open way that we haven't seen in a very long time.
I don't think it's going to be the lockdown. It's going to go another year.
Probably. I think 2022 is a better bet than this year for a lot of gaming. I think.
Well, historically, the Spanish flu of 1908 lasted for 3 years, and there was only 1.8 billion people in the world, and they could only travel by train and boat or ship around. So now we got 8 billion people.
It'll get better this year, but I don't think we'll be normal till next year. So I think Dave is correct.
Yeah, it's going to be probably a year and a half in my guess.
But on the positive side, that'll give us time to get out all the 40K Imperius Dominatus lists.
Exactly. Time to work on them.
Oh, yeah.
So,
if we can get one done a month, we can get done in a year.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is now, since we have all the templates and all that done, when the army list comes out, it comes out with everything, including army cards. So unlike before, where we were doing things more staggered because we're still kind of feeling our way through things. And now when an army comes out, it's out.
Well, we got slowed down a big time because we rewrote the points system too, and that slowed everything down. That was a lot of work to replace the values for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that it's an absolutely colossal amount of work that the two of you have been doing. I mean, when did you start the project?
Well, the official birthday for Imperius Dominatus is January 1st, 2018. So we are a little over 3 years right now.
Well, even at that, it's colossal what you've achieved in that time. I mean, that's massive. When it's just the two of you, really.
Yeah, we were really happy when we finally completed the Warfare and Age of Horus components. Imperius Dominatus was the 30K rules and had the website. For me, the website was the watershed, because you can have files on a Facebook group or a Dropbox or anything like that, but it's only really alive to people when they have a website they can go to at their leisure and download what they need, and they know that things are changing and getting updated.
Peter's awesome for getting stuff on like that done. That's just beyond words sometimes, the way he pumps everything out and gets it all sorted.
I got focus, or what people call OCD. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in front of a computer monitor sometimes, so when I come and sit and I enjoy it, that's the kind of thing. It's not like it's a chore. I like making silhouettes and army cards and formatting. Sounds kind of weird and nerdish, but hey, to each their own.
So this has been a growing experience for both of us too, because we're both pretty passionate about this, and we get at loggerheads sometimes, and says Peter won't back down, I won't back down, and then we steamed at each other and come back and say,
sometimes it's like the water dripping on the stone.
And then we come back and have to review and say, well, I review it or he reviews it, and then we give each other.
Yeah. A lot of times I'll just flat out say, nope, not gonna do that. Then like a week later, I'm like, yeah, let's do that. But it's that is derived from each of our functions, right? His function is to make things, is to create things. My function is to make sure they work in the confines and the strictures, and it doesn't violate the rules, or it's contradictory, or it has unintended consequences. So our jobs are different. Therefore, the way we approach things is going to be different, because David will just shoot stuff like a machine gun out of there, and I have to be the Kevlar vest.
I'm used to that, because when I did the Napoleonics rules, every week would have different changes to it, playtest them. And Peter doesn't like to do that. He likes to have playtesters tell us what we should do. But
yes, I think it's important that people who are not the people who create the rules are the ones that ultimately can tell if they're working or not, because the people who make the rules will instinctively fill the holes when they find them subconsciously. And the people who did not won't do that. They will say, well, this doesn't make sense because there's something missing here, which there have been on occasion. And I think that makes the rule set better.
Well, it's not perfect. We're not perfect. The rules pretty good, but there's going to be things we could do better. Always.
Oh, yeah. And I like when people point out things, because, it means A, they're engaged, and B, they're reading the rules. And that's kind of the point of the whole exercise. When you're engaged enough to read something, to critically say, well, this needs a little bit here more. And like I said, a lot of the time, I know how the game works. David knows how the game works because he made it. But that's not the point. The point is, whoever reads the rule, will they understand how the game works? And that in the end, that's all that matters.
We spend months just hammering out, well, how should cover work, or how did this work? Like at least a week debate on some things, on basic rule systems and how they would work in relation to everything else. So
yep. So yeah, it's all a massive cross reference at this point, because now that we have something that's actually made, now anything you introduce has to be weighed and measured against everything that exists, so that it'll work synchronously with it and not be something like an outlier. So in a certain sense, when you're making it from scratch, it's kind of easier because nothing's set in stone. But once you have some working format and you introduce something, you have to now kind of look at the whole and make sure you're not either breaking it or introducing an element that's not faithful for what the rest of the structure is representing.
But it's great that you're willing to allow the community to give you that feedback, and that you're open to the possibility that you might have to tweak things, because that's, obviously when it's published by Games Workshop or whatever games company it would be, then it's, it's locked in. There's nothing you can do about it. But because it's an online thing and you're willing to change, if you feel something really needs it, I suppose. I'm not saying you would change everything that everybody suggests by any stretch of imagination, but
you just described tangentially what's the difference between doing something because you want to do it and doing something because you want money from it, right? Because everything I've done Epic-wise has been in that vein. I just do it because I like to, and I give it to people to free because I want to. And I'm always willing to change it because, why not? If it makes it better, why not? But when you do a commercial project, it's a totally different thing because, the goal is not doing what you want. It's, to get people to buy whatever product you're doing. And it seems like a very trivial distinction, but, there's profound philosophical things that go along with it. David and me do it because we want to. And we give it to you to free because we want you to enjoy it. So if we want you to enjoy it and you tell me that something needs to be changed because you tried it out and it didn't work, we'll change it. In a commercial sense, changing things means more cost.
We don't have a deadline.
And that's the other thing. We don't have a deadline. It comes out when it comes out. And that's the other thing. I mean, we've had some feedback that has basically in practical terms mean a lot of work for us, but we did it anyway. Because if you're not willing to change upon the feedback that you're given, then like I often tell David, we're not making this thing for ourselves anymore. I mean, this has grown beyond that. We have to keep in mind who the people we're making this for, which is, the player base and any new people who want to try out Epic for the first time. So that's a different mindset there. So you're not set in stone necessarily anything. At the end of the day, playtesting is the thing. And if you tell me something's not quite right, we'll certainly explore it. And that's been the case up to this moment. And we're profoundly grateful for everyone who's taken even a minute of their time to give us some feedback. Because, nobody has to get into a new Epic game. Nobody has to download anything. Nobody has to read it and much less play it. That they have, is not only flattering, it's quite humbling. You have to think about what the rules are in the context of those people who are investing their time in it.
Well, it means we did something right.
Yeah, it's one of those old adages in NetEpic with the old NetEpic crew that remember kind of poke fun at me when that project started so long ago. I said, well, if at least one person downloads it and play it, I'll consider it enough. Of course, that was a rather low bar, and as it is with our current project, Imperius Dominatus. But that's kind of my thinking behind it. If you downloaded and played it, thanks a bunch. You made it the endeavor worthwhile.
There's another underlying thing here that you didn't mention before, Peter. It's because your experience with NetEpic and your name and you're well known in that game system that credence to this project too. That helped immensely.
Well, thanks. That's something I don't ever bring up or say myself, like, because it has a certain ring of arrogance to it and whatnot. But
it's true. Fact. You're known in the community.
Yes, I do recognize that that's a point, and many people may just give it a look over because it was made by, I'm part of the process of making it and putting it forth. And there's a certain amount of trust there, which I always humbly thank the Epic community to have bestowed upon me through the years. And I don't take that lightly either. And, but again, at the end of the day, regardless for the reasons you picked up Imperius Dominatus and gave it a whirl, I still say the same things I said during the NetEpic project. Thank you very much. And we appreciate your feedback.
And I think the fact that you talked about the ethos of Imperius Dominatus, you're doing it because it's fun, first and foremost, but you're also building fun into the actual mechanics of the game. I think it's a really important point. I mean, it's pretty much how I approach all the stuff I've been doing with my blog and on the channel and so on. I do it for fun. I do it because I enjoy these things, and these are things that I love. And the fact that the two of you love Epic so much that you want to make the ultimate rule set, I suppose, something that can be played by everyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the goal of everybody. Everybody wants the ultimate attached, whether it is or not. It's kind of beyond the point. It's the thing, like you said, you do it because you love it and you like people to try out new things. We hope people enjoy the fruits of our labor.
Yeah, we wanted to make it lore friendly, fun game to play, dynamic system it's going to be a very, very quick game. You can have large, crazy size battles compared to other systems and be able to get through it quickly.
Yes, the game is scalable as high as you want to play, and it will not break down.
Things die fast. Okay, you can put down 100 stands of troops and things will die fast and the game will be resolved in a day. That's the whole point of this. It's going to be lots of carnage on the tabletop. Like the battles are going to be truly epic and nasty and dangerous, and don't expect your unit to survive to the end of the game. Like things will be destroyed. It'd be very, very fast-paced game.
I'm sure it'll be great, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of great feedback back. And hopefully, if you haven't already checked out, as I say, the links will be beneath this podcast, wherever you're finding it.
Well, thanks a lot, Gordon. I appreciate the opportunity that you're giving us to, talk a little bit about Imperius Dominatus. And then, for those who don't know, me and Gordon go pretty far back. It's kind of funny that I've heard his voice for the first time during the interview, but, that's the nature sometimes of internet friendships. You've interacted with people for decades and perhaps you don't even know the sound of their voice, but at least that was the pleasant part of all this, beyond the interview and sharing topics of things we like. I got to hear Gordon's voice, so that alone for me was worth the trip.
No, well, likewise, it's great to talk to you directly, since it's all been through emails or on forums, wherever it's been across the years. Yeah, it's great to speak to you, and thanks for coming on, because it's great to hear you talking about and hear your passion for Imperius Dominatus, and I'm sure many people in the community will equally share that passion and enjoyment they'll get out of the rules. So please check it out.
We just want everyone to give it a try.
Yep.
Give it a try and tell us what you think. That's what it's all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you. And that's it. Thanks again to Peter and David for being so entertaining as they explained the process and ethos behind their system. And please follow the links you'll find with this podcast to find out more about ID. And for Epic fans wanting more podcasts, please watch this space, as myself and my good friend Craig will be embarking upon a series of podcasts. We will be sharing our favourite armies and units from 2nd edition and setting out some of our strategies for playing them. So until then, keep on living the life or die.